Drink all this eggnog. Finally, I've had one day. This is about finishing off items and seam binding, bias tape binding, whatever people call it these days. And what prompted this was I'm getting ready to do a little project, making a Christmas tree skirt. But I thought, yeah, I could do it, finish it off the normal way, or I could put some seam binding on it. Well, seam binding you can have. There's bias tape binding that you use. Most of the times the packages will just say seam binding. Well, I know it's bias binding. Now, bias binding is very important that has a rounded edge. There's hemless, there's all kinds of different things, but for making a Christmas tree skirt and making it finished off nice, I like to do the bias tape, seam binding, whatever you want to call it these days. For a 36-inch across diameter, you need at least a 36-inch square. So of your fabric, you just take a yard, 1 yard. It's going to be 44 inches by 36. Unless you're using 60-inch wide fabric. That's even better. Now, what bias binding does is it allows you to, even though it's not stretch fabric, the fibers move in that cut because it's cut not on the grain, which is straight, vertical or horizontal. It is cut on the bias, meaning diagonally. So it has a little bit of give. So when you go to put it around a circle, like a Christmas tree skirt, it will actually lay nice and as you stitch and then end up pressing it out. So to make bias binding or bias tape, some companies call it bias tape, you take your fabric. Sorry about that, I disappeared for a minute. And this is a yard, give or take a few inches. And you're going to take, and I'll stand up to show you how you get this started. Now, because this is so wide, not everybody has a 4-foot long self-healing mat to cut it on. Don't worry about that. We got that covered. And your bias binding is typically going to be 5/8 inch wide, a finished portion that you will see on the outside. You take your fabric and you make the square. That's why I said square. Let's say it's not a square. Let's just say we don't know. This is just a 1 yard piece, okay? You're going to take the easiest way to tell you how to do it is this is a selvage edge, the finished edge, and then the other selvage edge is on the opposite side. You're going to take here, and you're going to meet the bottom corner of that to the raw side. So you have a selvage side, unfinished edge. This is where it was cut off. And you're doing corner to corner to make it into this great big triangle. This is a great big triangle. Now, I don't have that kind of space to cut across there. So then I'm going to take it and do it one more time as a triangle this way. Just a little more doable with that. So now what? Well, I said we're cutting it. I did that. I was doing it in. I did that I did it the opposite way. You're actually doing it. Yeah, I did it right. I just visually I didn't see which side I had put it on. But you want your right sides together, which I should have told you that. So now I've got this thing folded in half as a triangle, and then that triangle folded in half. Now you'll notice there's an edge here that has 2 folds because that is that big long spot that you just folded that thing in half with. That is where you cut because that is the bias. That's the part that runs through the middle of the square diagonally. Now, I still haven't figured out which one of these I'm going to use for my Christmas tree skirt. I mean, this seems traditional. It's got the glitter and the green color for one side. I know I'm putting red on the other side. And then I've got this one. It's a Christmassy. It's got pine cones and cranberries, it looks like, or something like that. but it is Christmassy in the sense of, what you normally would see in the season. Now for the bias binding, because I'm going to bind the outside edge of my Christmas tree skirt with this beautiful gold satin. Now, when it comes to fabrics, making bias binding, a lot of people ask, is there a certain kind of material you have to use? And I tell them, no, this is not a stretch fabric. You can use anything within reason. You want something that's going to hold up, that's going to look good. You want it with a little bit of body. You can use denim, blends jersey cotton, but you do not want to use a stretch knit. You don't want to use a stretch knit because it will stretch too much. Because when you're going around a gradual, even like on a neckline, you know how they'll have you do bias binding on the neckline. You don't want something that has a bunch of stretch, just a little bit of stretch, because it's that give. It just has that little bit of give to get around that little bit of a curve. So you can use, and the thing is with bias binding is stores and most of your companies that make it in the pre-packaged, well, you can only get, and that package only has 3 or 4 yards. I had a project one time and I needed 6 yards and I had to buy 2 packages and I had to piece it together. And I really don't like doing that because I don't like extra seams showing. I don't know about you, but that's me. Christmas tree skirt probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but when you cut your bias binding strips to make your bias binding tape, as they call it, you want to start in the center because that's the longest strip you're going to get out of it. Out of that yard, that's the longest strip you're going to get. And that way, if you do have to piece it, and it's a huge circumference, you only need 2 strips and maybe not even. So you may have enough just with one, but 2 strips is nicer because you can put a seam on either end of what you're going around. So you don't have like 4 seams all around. It's like, that's what I can't stand. So what I do typically, because I never know what I'm going to use bias binding on, and I know that this gold is something that I would use on a lot of different colors, then I would just cut all the way down to about 10 inches to where the strip is 10 inches wide. Now this right now, if I measured this in the center, I'd have to double this. We've got, let's see, that's 18 here. And then right here, 18 foot, about 32 inches. So this is going to be a 32-inch long piece of bias binding, or the strip for making a 32-inch piece of bias binding. Now I've had some issues with my rotary cutter today. I put a brand new blade in it. For some reason, it just doesn't want to do its job. But best thing that I can tell you, if you're going to have a 5/8 inch wide bias binding strip to use to bind something, you need to cut a 2.5 inch strip. This just happens to be exactly 2.5 inches wide. Every person who sews should have one of these. These are acrylic, so you don't have as much hesitation when you're making your cuts. Now, since my rotary cutter is being a stinker today, and if you don't have one and you want to do it old school way, I call it, use a regular ruler too, where those 2 folds, which was that big long fold, I'm going to measure 2.5 inches all the way across and then cut it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you show you where and how and all that stuff. So this shows the 2 folds. See, that's the 2 folds. And I'm going to move down just a little bit. 60-inch long, this in half at this halfway mark. And I actually could do that. And so I could get an extra strip out of it. Because they're folded, when this gets cut, this is going to be 2 inches if you mark it at the halfway mark. So basically what I'm saying is you see 1.5, because that's how I wash out fabric marker pen. And these come in different colors. I like these because they show it well, and cold water takes it right out. You don't even have to use soap. The water just, as if you do it like right after you've done the project, you just dip that thing in water, it take it right out. So I'm going to do this 2.5 inch strip. Good one is in the other sewing room of mine. then you just go down the thing. Just take your time. You want to make sure you keep them even, because these things will tend to slide around on you, especially satin. I have to use it. I mean, yeah, it's great material, but sometimes it can be a little bit fussy, as they say. So I'm going to go all the way down to the end here and do that. I have a little bulge there, and it's fine if it ends up being a little bit wider than 2.5, but it has to be at least 2.5 inches. Now, because the satin, here's a hint about something. Satin is infamous for fraying on the edges. So, to avoid that, you use pinking shears when you're cutting satin, okay? I highly recommend it. Otherwise, what happens is, I'll do a demonstration. That's what fraying is. It's slowly unraveling. And you don't want that. And it's no fun, because then you have to cut more fabric because you don't have enough. And we're just not going to go there. I'm being a lefty. I got to start at this end. So I'm a lefty by my main way of cutting. I'm a righty for opening up jars and whatnot. I have more strength in my right hand than my left hand, which is really odd for someone. Now I'm holding these folds. You can pin them, you can clip them, you know, you can see what I did? The wrong side as well as the right. It's not heavy enough. So we're gonna just go on down the hall, and I'm gonna pinch them as I go and cut to the. I'm just gonna go for it. Key point. I went and started rolling this up here. Before you put this piece away, what I like to do is I like to take a nice big pin. It doesn't matter. You can take a safety pin if you want. And pin all the layers together where you did to cut it, so that the next time you need to cut bias tape, you got it already set up. Oh, it's calling me. Okay. Friend of ours. Sorry for the interruption. That's what happens when you go live. Every time I go live, somebody interrupts with it. So that's what you want to do. You can even put a piece of paper on there that says bias tape, and you can give yourself instructions like drawing a cut from here to here. Especially when you're new at this and you're starting your little stash of things that you use, you want to make sure you remember what your stash is. And I'm in that process right now of labeling everything, because I came across some things like, what was I going to do with that? So anyway, this being, like I said, this is not as neat as it could be. I can neaten it up as I go, but 2.5 inches, except for that funny looking end, looks like somebody's tie. But you want a 2.5 inch minimum strip. Now, even with this being kind of crooked looking, added this and that. So this piece here is really long. And when I go to make it to the bias binding, it gives just a tiny bit of stretch. I don't know if you can see how it kind of stretches a little bit. Okay. Now to make your bias tape, bind tape, what I do, and makes it easier, is I will take this satin and fold the wrong sides together and then press it to get a crease down the middle. I got my little iron over here. Oh, yeah, you can see me through there. And with my holiday eggnog, but there's no alcohol in there. I just eat the eggnog from the store. I mean, you don't have to really know that, but anyway. And I was working on some other bias binding. Make sure my iron's on the little hot side. Now, if you anyway, it gets hot. So you don't want to burn your fingers on your fabric, but I have burnt my fingers before using satin. This does not feel good. So I'm just going to put a little burst of steam in there. Get a nice little crease in the center. I'm going to show you If I wanted to make single fold, I would just do one side towards the center, and that will be the single fold. This is both sides towards the center. That makes it double fold. Okay, I gotta trim this part that I cut crooked at the end. Oh my goodness, there we go. So we're going to, and do the burst of steam because it's faster. That's why I said watch your fingers. And this is on the hot steam setting. And I'm going to show you, if I can get to a double fold bias tape. You can stitch one side on at a time. Stitch one side and turn it over and stitch the other side. You can use bias binding foot, which I haven't practiced with mine yet. This is going to be its debut. I used to just do, I call it old school without all the fancy gizmos and presser feet because we didn't have them back then. You just had to do it like, sometimes it was hand stitched on. You did what you needed to do. Now, the thing with bias binding is when you go to do more than one strip, there is something you have to remember to do, and that is to do it on an angle. It's cut on an angle, you have to connect them at an angle. So, with that said, okay, this is the binding. I have pressed it, and I've got a nice crease right down the center. The next thing, and then of course it's going at the iron again. If your fabric is arguing with you, like mine does, when you bend it in towards the center and you press that, you can pin it as long as you don't use the pins with the plastic ends. Just press it, and then on one, and you press the other side. The great thing about some of the binding feet is you don't look like, let me cut this. This is the good thing you make a main tie. It's also done on bias. Part of it is anyway, depending on the style tie that you're making. So bring it in like this. Right down here, make it nice and straight. Make it straighter. So you can see, I'm going to cut it off of the end here so you can see how to put them together. And I don't know if you've ever looked at when you bought a package of bias binding, how it's in pieces itself. You're getting a 4-yard piece still in pieces. Something wrong with that picture, if you ask me. So, okay, I have one bias binding here, one here. You open it up. You haven't stitched it on the item that you're making yet. Okay. You're putting right sides together. Okay, right sides together. And the way you're going to stitch it is, come on, you. I'm going to mark it so you can actually see. You're going to stitch it diagonally. You're not going to stitch it straight up and down. You're going to stitch it diagonally in keeping with, because when you get done, when you finish with that, bias binding is very helpful. You'll get to see more of that in the subsequent video. I'm going to do the Christmas tree skirt. It's yeah, I've already figured out what I'm going to use as a fabric. So if there's anything that you guys like or would like to see or haven't seen in my videos yet, I do live ones every so often. I'm trying to do better about doing more different things. I've had several requests, and I've done videos for those individuals that have requested them. And it's a shout out to all y'all. And hey, if you liked it, didn't like it, just comment, let me know. Give me a thumbs up and share. It may not be your forte, but maybe you know somebody who wants to learn a few things. Like I do these embroidery things. I got some videos coming up on that. Just on the Christmas tree skirt on the side that's kind of just one color and kind of boring. I would put some kind of applique. So just keep on sewing and let me know. Hey, I think it wants me to keep talking. Okay.